He wasn't a shadow in the night. He was a man hiding in plain sight, in the same forests we go to escape the world. Between 2007 and 2008, hikers across the southeastern United States started vanishing, not in cities, not on highways, but deep in the heart of America's national forests. No one knew what linked them. The victims were different ages, different genders, different states. He wasn't a shadow in the night. But they all had one thing in common. They were alone in the woods. Police were baffled. Bodies were turning up, dismembered, decapitated, scattered across miles of remote wilderness. There were no fingerprints, no consistent weapons, just silence. And he made a mistake. That mistake led authorities to Gary Michael Hilton, a drifter, a dog lover, and a man who turned the beauty of nature into a hunting ground. But the truth behind his crimes, it's darker than anyone could have imagined, because Hilton didn't just kill, he stalked, he studied, he tortured. And when he finally confessed, his story unveiled something terrifying. This wasn't random. This was planned. And the number of victims, it might be far higher than anyone will ever know. This is the chilling true story of the National Forest serial killer, and why some believe he never acted alone. Gary Michael Hilton was born on November 22, 1946 in Atlanta, Georgia, a city that would come to play a dark role in his twisted path. From a young age, Hilton's life was anything but ordinary. His parents, unstable and emotionally distant, provided him little sense of security. As a child, he was often isolated, and when his parents finally split, he was left to fend for himself. But it wasn't just family dysfunction that shaped Hilton. In his teenage years, he began exhibiting signs of violent tendencies. While other kids were playing sports or dreaming of the future, Hilton was experimenting with cruelty, small acts of violence against animals. To him, it felt like power, like control, and that power was intoxicating. As he grew older, Hilton enlisted in the U.S. Army, an escape perhaps from a life he was too afraid to face. But even here he couldn't outrun his demons. Hilton struggled with his mental health, and after a few years, was discharged for mental instability. The same survival skills that made him an asset in the military would later turn into deadly tools. Tools he would use to track, stalk, and kill. Returning to civilian life, Hilton became a drifter, a man with no permanent home, living out of his van, moving from one place to the next. He kept a dog with him at all times, a loyal companion who helped him blend in, making him appear harmless to those around him. But behind his weathered exterior, there was something far more dangerous brewing. Hilton wasn't just a homeless man wandering the streets. He was someone who had learned to survive in the wilderness, to navigate it with a skill that would serve him far more sinister purposes. As he grew older, his behavior became even more erratic. The small crimes escalated, the violent tendencies amplified. And yet, no one suspected that beneath the facade of a man with a dog and a broken past was a predator. A predator who would soon turn America's national parks into his personal hunting ground. But what triggered it? What finally pushed Hilton to snap? The truth might be simpler than we think for Hilton. The world had always been a place of abandonment. No one ever gave him the love he needed, the understanding he craved. And as he slipped further into his mental delusions, the pain and rage that had built up over decades finally broke free, taking innocent lives along with it. Gary Michael Hilton wasn't just a man with a troubled past. He was a mind warped by years of neglect, mental instability, and delusion. The mind of a killer doesn't just wake up one day. It is crafted over time, piece by piece, through trauma, isolation, and unanswered needs. From the beginning, Hilton was abandoned by the very people who should have cared for him. His childhood was marked by neglect, his parents emotionally distant and inconsistent. Imagine a young child, desperate for attention, but constantly ignored. Loneliness became his closest companion, and it fueled an obsession with control. As he grew, Hilton became increasingly frustrated by the world that rejected him. This frustration eventually turned inward, creating a deadly combination of anger and self-loathing. He learned to project this anger outward in the most dangerous ways. His early acts of cruelty toward animals were the first signs that Hilton wasn't just another troubled soul. He was someone with the potential to hurt others. Violence became a coping mechanism, a way to feel powerful, to take control over a world that had always made him feel weak and powerless. But what really triggered the shift from troubled man to killer? It wasn't just the violence in his past or the lack of love he received. It was his growing delusions. Hilton wasn't just living on the edge of reality. He had slipped off the cliff. His mind became a place where fantasy and reality blurred. He began to believe that he was entitled to take whatever he wanted, even if that meant killing. The wilderness, with its lonely beauty, became Hilton's domain. He didn't just survive there, he thrived. His survivalist skills turned deadly as he learned to hunt in the woods, not for food, but for human prey. Hilton had no fear of being caught. He knew the forest like the back of his hand, and his victims. They were just isolated targets, alone and vulnerable, easy to overpower. But what set Hilton apart from many other serial killers wasn't just his survival instincts. It was his methodical nature. He stalked his victims for days, learning their routines, studying their every move. To Hilton, this was more than just murder. It was a game where the thrill of the chase and the satisfaction of the kill were intertwined in a twisted dance. His mind wasn't chaotic, it was calculating, strategic, and cold. For Hilton, the act of killing wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was planned, cold-blooded, and, in his mind, justified. He saw himself as someone who had been wronged, someone who had to take matters into his own hands. Each victim was a symbol of his resentment, each death a twisted form of revenge on the world that had cast him aside. As the bodies piled up, Hilton's mental state deteriorated further. Delusions grew stronger. He started to believe that he was invincible, that he could never be caught. His confidence in his ability to kill and get away with it grew as his crimes became more brazen. But even a mind like Hilton's could slip up. Mistakes were made, clues left behind, and eventually the world would catch up to him. But before that happened, Hilton had already planted the seeds of something much darker. The possibility that there were more victims, more deaths, and that Hilton's reign of terror was far from over. What makes Hilton's story even more terrifying is this: he didn't just act on a whim. He acted on a deep-seated belief that he was entitled to take whatever he wanted. To stalk, hurt, and kill. In Hilton's twisted world, it wasn't a crime. It was survival. And the worst part, he didn't even feel remorse. It's the year 2007, and across the southeastern United States, a haunting pattern begins to emerge. People, mostly hikers and campers, are vanishing from the wilderness, disappearing without a trace. At first, no one connects the dots. After all, people go missing in the woods all the time, right? But this was different. Hilton wasn't just targeting anyone. He was choosing vulnerable individuals, often alone, and he knew exactly how to hunt them. The first victim, January 2007, a lone hiker, a woman in her mid-20s, was last seen near Georgia's national forests. Her body wouldn't be discovered for weeks, dismembered and decapitated. Police had no leads, no clues. But this wasn't random. Hilton was just warming up. The killing spree begins. Spring 2007, as the warm months rolled in, so did more disappearances. Now Hilton had refined his method. He followed the same pattern. He'd stake out remote hiking trails and pick off anyone traveling alone. His victims were left in the deep woods, their bodies scattered and mutilated. By now, investigators were scratching their heads, unable to figure out what tied these killings together. Different states, different victims, different motives, but they were all targeted in the wilderness. No one was safe. The abduction of Meredith Emerson, January 2008. This would be the turning point. Meredith Emerson, a young woman, was hiking with her dog near Blood Mountain, Georgia. She was the perfect target. Hilton approached, disarmed her, and abducted her. The next few days were a nightmare. He kept her alive for days, toying with her, torturing her, stalking her every move. But Meredith was strong, and she fought back, trying to escape, trying to survive. For a moment, Hilton's grip loosened. He let her go, thinking she'd run straight into his hands. But she didn't. Meredith had a plan. She told Hilton she'd be able to help him escape the area. A false promise to buy time. It worked. She managed to escape, running to a nearby road, where she was able to flag down help. Meredith lived to tell the tale, and her escape would be the beginning of the end for Hilton. The mistake. January 2008, in his desperation to silence Meredith, Hilton made a mistake, one that would unravel everything. Meredith's escape was his first failure, but that wasn't the only problem. Hilton was sloppy. He left evidence, his blood-stained clothing, a footprint, all leading straight to him. The capture, January 2008, just days after Meredith's escape, Hilton was caught. The FBI tracked him down after Meredith's testimony, and the evidence from the crime scene led authorities directly to him. What followed was a confession that sent chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. The aftermath, though Hilton's capture ended the immediate terror, the investigation revealed more victims, some whose bodies were found deep in the woods, others whose names remained unknown. The exact number of victims Hilton took will never be fully known, and there's a dark possibility that there were more unsolved disappearances that were his doing. The arrest of Gary Michael Hilton marked the end of a chilling spree, but what followed was a series of legal battles that would unearth even more unsettling details about his psychological state and the depths of his crimes. The world now knew his name, but the question remained, would he be held accountable for the lives he took? And how would the court system handle a man whose mind was as twisted as his crimes? The arrest and initial investigation, once Hilton was captured after Meredith Emerson's brave escape and the mounting evidence against him, the FBI began digging into his past. Hilton's criminal history, his time in the U.S. Army, and his background as a drifter all painted a picture of a man who had been living in the shadows, untouched by the law for decades. But the truth was far more disturbing. Hilton wasn't just an isolated predator. He was a serial killer, one who had honed his craft in the wilds of America's forests. Police uncovered a mountain of evidence tying him to multiple disappearances across the southeastern United States. The more they dug, the darker the truth became. The trial begins, 2008, in the aftermath of his capture. Hilton faced charges for the abduction and murder of Meredith Emerson and other victims, including James and Geraldine Lothridge. His defense team, hoping to avoid the death penalty, argued that Hilton's actions were the result of mental illness, citing his history of instability and his discharge from the U.S. Army due to mental health issues. But the state's case was strong, and the prosecution painted Hilton as a cold-blooded killer who had deliberately planned and executed his attacks in a manner that demonstrated clear malice and forethought. They argued that Hilton's actions were not the result of a mental breakdown, but of calculation. He was in full control of his faculties when he committed his crimes. Hilton's confession, a chilling admission. The trial reached a climactic moment when Hilton himself took the stand. What followed was a shocking confession, not one of remorse, but one of chilling indifference. Hilton admitted to the murders of Meredith Emerson and the Lothridges, but in a way that made the courtroom shiver. He described the thrill of the kill, the strategic nature of his planning, and the control he felt as he stalked his prey. For Hilton, this wasn't about rage, it was about power. He spoke of the joy he took in hunting and killing, and how he had perfected his methods over the years, turning the national forests into his personal domain. He admitted that he had considered other victims, but had either lost interest or had to leave them behind. The most chilling part, Hilton was calm, collected, almost detached as he recounted his actions. No remorse, no guilt, just the cold, calculated confession of a man who viewed his crimes as nothing more than execution of his will. The sentencing. After the confession, the court turned to the issue of sentencing. Hilton was convicted of murder and kidnapping, and in 2008, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Meredith Emerson. The jury was unable to come to a unanimous decision on the death penalty, so Hilton was spared. However, Hilton was also facing federal charges for the other murders, including the deaths of the Lothridges, and the possibility of more victims in other unsolved disappearances. At that point, Hilton was already facing a life sentence for the Emerson murder, meaning he would never walk free again. But as his case continued to unfold, it became clear that the number of his victims would never be fully known. Hilton was secretive and manipulative. He refused to provide a clear count of how many people he had actually killed. A twisted legacy. Though Hilton's life in prison meant that he could never harm anyone again, the shadow of his crimes loomed large. He had left behind a trail of grief, confusion, and fear in his wake. As for the families of his victims, their suffering continued, with many still haunted by the uncertainty of how many lives Hilton had truly destroyed. But the psychological analysis of Hilton's case continued to be a point of fascination for criminologists and psychologists. They debated his true motivations. Was it mental illness or sheer malice? What drove a man to take the lives of strangers in such a calculated and horrific manner? Hilton died in 2018, still behind bars. But the questions surrounding his crimes, the ones he never fully answered, linger, leaving a legacy of fear and unanswered questions about just how far his darkness truly went. Even though Gary Michael Hilton was convicted for the murders of Meredith Emerson and the Lothridges, there remains an unsettling silence around several disappearances that may also be tied to him. While the authorities focused on the cases he admitted to, the forests where Hilton stalked his victims hold a deep, haunting mystery. Were these killings part of a larger pattern? And how many victims did Hilton truly claim before his capture? The unsolved disappearances, an ongoing mystery between 2007 and 2008. The Southeast United States saw a series of disappearances that were unusual, but without enough evidence to conclusively tie them to Hilton. Hikers, campers, and solo adventurers vanished in the wilderness, their disappearances eerily similar to those of Hilton's confirmed victims. But the connection was never fully made. The absence of solid evidence and the random nature of these disappearances left investigators with more questions than answers. Could Hilton have been involved in these cases as well? Or were these crimes the work of another predator, still lurking in the shadows? Theories on Hilton's other victims. 1. Unsolved cases in Florida. A chilling pattern. Several disappearances in Florida's Everglades and national parks have been tied to Hilton in post-conviction analysis. Victims, all alone in the wilderness, were last seen hiking or camping. They, like Hilton's known victims, were never seen again, and their bodies were never found. Theory: some believe Hilton's hunting grounds extended into Florida's dense, isolated forests, and that these disappearances were part of a larger spree that was never investigated with Hilton in mind. 2. The unlikely victims. Family and friends. Hilton's history as a drifter and his occasional connections with strangers raise the possibility that some of his victims might have been acquaintances. People who trusted him, believed he was harmless, and yet disappeared without a trace. Theory: Hilton might have been involved in killings that didn't follow his typical pattern of hunting hikers. His close proximity to some people suggests that some of his victims may have been intimate acquaintances who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. 3. Cold cases and potential links. Several cold cases across the U.S. have been revisited after Hilton's conviction. Some of these involve victims who vanished in areas Hilton was known to frequent, including North Carolina and Tennessee. Theory: criminologists suggest Hilton could have had a larger territory than initially suspected, possibly traveling across state lines. His methods, from dismemberment to decapitation, could fit the profiles of other unsolved cases where bodies were found in similarly remote areas. The unseen victims. A serial killer's signature. One of the most chilling aspects of Hilton's crimes is the emotional detachment he showed towards his victims. His complete lack of remorse and the strategic nature of his killings suggest he was not simply driven by a need for violence, but rather by a deep psychological satisfaction from stalking, controlling, and ultimately destroying his prey. Theory: Hilton's desire for power over his victims likely led him to target those who were alone and vulnerable. It's possible that the real number of victims he claimed could be far higher than we will ever know, with many disappearances simply attributed to accidents or other causes. The national forests. Unseen danger. In the years following Hilton's conviction, a disturbing reality set in. Many of the areas where he killed remain some of the most remote and isolated places in the U.S. The national parks he frequented are vast, and hundreds of people still go missing every year without explanation. Could there be more serial killers hiding in these forests, unseen by the public? Hilton's ability to evade detection for so long raises an unnerving possibility that Hilton wasn't working alone. Some believe that Hilton had an accomplice, someone who might have helped him commit these murders or covered up the crimes. Theory: the theory of multiple predators lurking in America's national parks has gained traction, especially with the eerie silence surrounding unsolved cases that closely resemble Hilton's known crimes. Could Hilton have been part of a larger network of killers, each targeting the vulnerable in places they believed no one would ever think to look? Conclusion: the unanswered questions. Despite Hilton's conviction and the closure it brought to some families, his dark legacy continues to haunt the wilderness. The theories surrounding his unresolved crimes linger, leaving a chilling question: how many victims did Gary Michael Hilton really have? Theories range from his involvement in cold cases across the U.S. to suspicions of a larger network of predators working in tandem. He was a drifter, a killer, a ghost in the wilderness. But Gary Michael Hilton was not a myth. He was real, flesh and blood. He moved through the same forests families hike through, camped in, trusted as safe havens from the chaos of the world. And that's what makes this story so terrifying, because monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes they walk beside us. His crimes remind us that danger doesn't always announce itself. It smiles. It has a name. It even owns a dog. And though Hilton sits behind bars, the questions he left behind remain unanswered. How many victims were there really? Did he act alone? And most disturbing of all, could someone else be out there right now, doing the same thing? These are the stories we tell not just to remember the victims, but to protect the next one. So if this story unsettled you, if it made you think twice about the safety of solitude, share it. Let others know, because somewhere, someone might just be walking into the woods, alone, thinking they're safe. If you found this story chilling and want more deep dives into real-life mysteries and the darkest corners of human nature, subscribe. We uncover the truths others leave buried. And if you know of a case that needs to be told, drop it in the comments. Your tip might just lead to the next episode.